Hi, I'm Seamless, and today is Monday, and this is the making of G Sharp Part 2. This is going to be a quick one because there's not really a lot happening in this song. So let's get to it. Let's start with the obvious thing, the guitar. So the anatomy, if you've never done metal, or have never used a metal, like, a guitar in metal sense, or even a rock sense, like, this might not be sort of a thing to you, so I'm going to go over sort of like the anatomy of a guitar tone. In the stack, I have a whole bunch of stuff. This Edison is here so that I can record the dry input, because that's where this all begins, with the dry signal. And without all this stuff, this is what the dry signal sounds like. Boy, doesn't that sound ridiculous. Now, I created this in a non-linear fashion. Non-linear fashion. What I mean by that is that I didn't make it put in the Edison, and then I put it in the Maximus, and then the wave shape, and all that stuff. I built it according to what I just referred to as being the anatomy of a guitar tone. And the anatomy of a guitar tone is actually pretty simple. It is a distortion of some kind, and then a cabinet of some kind. And then you can complicate matters with a bunch of different stuff. And Guitar Rig, especially, is actually pretty good about displaying this kind of stuff. I use more than just Guitar Rig here, but it's good about, you have your head, you have your cabinet, and then you have, like, stuff you put in the middle, which is normally guitar pedals. If you ever see someone playing a guitar and they have, like, a crap ton of pedals, sometimes they'll have rack gear, but both of those kinds of those formats usually accomplish the same kind of thing, which is that we're trying to mess with the signal a bit to change the tone of the sound, because a normal guitar head doesn't usually have a huge amount of customizable options in terms of shaping your tone. It has pretty okay ones, pretty basic. I mean, what we're looking at here, Guitar Rig, is pretty representative of what you might see in a real world guitar head. Things like, bass, middle, and treble, and then post gain, and then presence, and all these other things, pre-gain, maybe more than one channel for two different kinds of tones that you can switch between, that kind of thing. Well, that's more or less what's up. And then the cabinet, the thing about, they're called speaker cabinets. They were also referred to as guitar cabs. And the reason why they're specific to guitar is because they're not full spectrum cabinets. If you were to run a song through an amp into a cabinet, even if it was like clean and not distorted at all, you would hear it sound kind of muffly and weird. And that's because guitar speakers are designed to shape a guitar tone to make it sound like what we expect guitar distortion to sound like. I'm not actually using this head, and that's because I'm using a separate head. This is a free guitar distortion head that somebody named Poulin made, and if you just Google Poulin, you'll find it. It's free. You can go grab it. So I got this preset here, and then I disabled the head, and then I put in my own head here. And this is still pretty similar, input, output, different kinds of parameters. It's, as far as what they do, it's usually pretty general. And what I mean by that is that the kind of the character that the head has is usually predetermined even before you mess with any kind of the tones, any kind of like the knobs or whatever. That's mostly just color corrections, color decisions, basic equalizing, and that kind of thing. But as far as what the distortion actually does, it's usually pretty straightforward, and it's usually unique to each particular head. Yeah. So now, when I mess around with the heads, I guess it would probably be easier if this just was not here to get the view to be appropriate. So when I normally begin by creating the distortion and then the cabinet. Now, the way that the Guitar Rig's cabinet system works, there's various different kinds of cabinets. There's just straight up like the cab that is matched with the actual, see here it says amps versus cabs. There's actually like cabs that are matched with particular amp types and that kind of thing. They're designed to kind of fit well together. And then there's the control rooms. There's two of them. There's one that was from Guitar Rig 4, which is what this guy is, and then there's the new one, which is called Control Room Pro. Now, the way that cabinet emulations work is that they're usually done through impulse responses, which is actually pretty similar to the technology. It's almost the same. as the technology behind convolution reverb. If you don't know what convolution reverb is where you have somebody went somewhere and like shot a starter pistol in like a church or something, and then recorded the reverb. And now the deconvolver knows what the original starter pistol sounds like in terms of like its kind of the general shape and transient of it, and then, or even sometimes people will just play a signal and and the sound will know exactly what that original signal was, and therefore it's able to determine what the difference in the sound was, the reverb, and what the reverb did to the sound, and it can take that difference and it can apply it to stuff that's run through the convolver. So when you use like if you go into if you get a convolver, which I think I might have somewhere, maybe not. FL has a convolver, and if I were to find more impulse responses, that's what they sound like, because somebody went somewhere and recorded that, and then now I'm able to apply those reverb characteristics to whatever gets passed through the convolver. It's really quite impressive kind of technology. Now, for guitar stuff, the way this works is that somebody will pass a signal through the guitar cabinet, and it'll be a side wave sweep. So it'll start low, and then it'll just sweep up and down. And what it's doing there is that it'll be able to tell the frequency response of the cabinet. It'll be able to match perfectly the what it does to a sound, because say like as it goes through a particular range of frequencies, it's fine, and then it goes a bit higher, and then it gets lower or higher, and the way that it behaves, the emulation, the deconvolution is able to tell how it behaved going through the speaker, and thus is able to apply that behavior to whatever goes through it. And so we have the various cabinet types that they ran this kind of process through. And also, if you just Google guitar cabinet IRs or guitar cabinet impulse responses, you'll find a whole bunch that sound a lot like the clicky kind of transient stuff that you would have heard in the reverb convolution. And those actually, if you put them in the convolver, in the FL40 convolver, you can actually use it like it's a guitar cabinet past distortion. And see, that's the point, is that distortion before kind of convolution sounds way different. What we understand to be the tone that is a guitar tone is the majority of that is accomplished in the cabinet phase. The distortion's a big part of it, but it's not. I mean, as you just heard, it's sort of a gigantic mess if it's passed through full spectrum. So that's why the emulation is just as important. But if you made a distortion and then you put a convolver and you had a guitar cabinet impulse response file, it'll behave just like what just happened there, where I turned on guitar rig and suddenly we had the cab sound. The control room is a bit more advanced than just using impulse response, because you have multiple versions of it, and then also has different microphones. So it did that frequency sweep not just for the cabinet, but also for the specific microphone position and that whole shit. So it's very in depth. It's very cool, and it's able to emulate what it's like to actually record a guitar cabinet as if it were in a room. Which, by the way, having done, I never want to do again, because this is just way better. This technology wasn't always awesome. The original Guitar Rig and Guitar Rig 2 even were not super special when it comes to sort of how the sound's made. And Guitar Rig 3 was passable. It didn't really start to become good until Guitar Rig 4. And there are other options as well. Amplitude, I think. Maybe just Amplitude. Revolver. There's hardware solutions like the Axe Effects. You might be familiar with that. And those, like the Axe Effects, is super fucking good. It's like... It's also really expensive, which is unfortunate, but it's just on point with how it sounds. YouTube Axe Effects presets. So you find a guy that plays through all of them, and there's no way that anybody who isn't like a guitar scientist would be able to distinguish between what they're hearing as an Axe Effects digitally created sound versus an actually real recorded guitar sound. And a lot of like sort of bleeding edge modern metal bands use that as like their primary thing. So no, I don't want to record guitars ever again with cabinets. So anyway, distortion, cabinet. Now a big part about how the guitar interacts with this stuff has to do with the guitar itself. In particular, for this song, I used my Schecter Damien 7 which I don't think they make anymore, but I actually found this one used. Because I have the Damien 6 and then Damien 7 matches it, and that's just a weird impulse on my part because I usually don't care about aesthetics. But I like the way that the 6 performs, and the 7 is basically the same guitar, only with a 7th string. So it works pretty good. Its pickups are EMG, not 707s. Maybe they are 707s, but they're EMG pickups. Just like on the 6, which is a pair of EMG HZs, Hertz, EMG Hertz. And they're considered kind of to be like the shittier EMGs on the market, and they're not wrong, but how the guitar sounds and how it behaves has to do with the guitar's pickups, whether the strings are new or not, the tuning you're in, the thickness of the strings, all these physical things impact how the tone behaves and performs, but we can kind of control that a little bit, and that is through putting EQ before the distortion. Now, basically, the whole point of this is to basically control for your pickups. So right now, this is what it sounds like with just the basic distortion. And here's what it sounds like with the EQ before distortion. A big change. Primarily, I took away some of the low end, so that means the rumbly kind of muddiness is going to go away a bit because this is just going to not interfere with the basses as much. And I did a little bit of shaping here, which is mostly I just did because I thought it sounded cool. And then this is a boost at the twang. What is the twang? The twang is a special particular bit of harmonics that is string specific, which is to say that if I'm playing mostly on the same string, which in the song I kind of am, it'll always be in the same spot no matter what note I'm playing, because the twang is a product of the thickness of the string. So different strings have different twang. Like, the low B will have one position, which is where it is right now, and then the E will have a higher position, and then the twang governs kind of the gritty, metallic sounding nature of the sound. So watch what happens when I mess with it. It's a really big impact on how the sound sounds. So, like, when you're messing with your pre-distortion, that's a thing that you want to pay attention to because it'll have a very large control over the tone of your sound. This is also true for other non-guitar stuff. If anyone's ever talking about, how you want to control how the distortion behaves in any sound whatsoever, putting an equalizer before the distortion will give you a tremendous amount of control over the sound. Way more so than if you put a EQ after the distortion, in which case you're really only be able to react to what the distortion's already doing. So after that, I put on a wave shaper. Now, this is kind of an interesting experiment on my part because remember what I mentioned before about pedals. Guitar players like to have pedals to try and color their sound and shape it the way they want it to sound. And one of the things that they use a lot is something called the screamer pedal. It's if you just Google screamer pedal, you'll find this green thing, and if you ever look at it inside Guitar Rig, it actually looks pretty much like that. Screamer right there. It's a very simple thing. It's basically a little bit of added distortion, and sometimes it could be all the added distortion, because another part about pedals that some people will do is that they'll have their head, they'll run the clean channel, put it out into the amp, and then put the distortion before the head, and with one of these pedals. And so they have different kinds of, this is how you get different kinds of distortion, different kinds of control over your distortion, and different kinds of color to your sound. So this is what the pedals are for. They're basically like putting effects in the signal chain. It's the literal physical representation of what that is. So, but given that I am doing digitally what's been done physically for years and years, I tried to sort of put myself in the shoes of people who would shape this in real life, and trying to see kind of what like the way is. So I put this wave shaper in there, and I kind of put it in such a form that would make it sound kind of fuzzy. That's what that sounds like before everything, and this is what it sounds like with everything. It's real subtle. This stuff is usually pretty subtle. And I also have the wet dry not all the way on, and I also have the wet dry up here not all the way on, which is literally the same thing, and I could have just picked one and ran with it, but I didn't. And now I have this Maximus. Now the Maximus is literally I'm just putting compression before the chain. I think actually at this point I was using it as a gate. Yeah, so it looks like there's 1 point down here, but there's actually 2 points. It's just that second point is like almost It's like at the second farthest point it could be from also being at as far away as it can get. And this is basically a noise gate. You can kind of see it doing it there. And this actually has almost no impact on how the sound sounds together. Like it does, because the time variables are so fast, it adds a little bit of extra distortion. But this is mostly for when I was actually like playing it and recording it live, that I didn't have incredible amount of noise, because lots of distortion like this with like a huge amount of just gain, so much gain means that like all the noise in like the signal and the guitar and the pickups are just gonna just be huge. The thing is though, is that without all of that there, the noise is actually really, really quiet. And with the idea of this noise gate being that like it shuts off at minus 44 dB, it means that anything lower than minus 44 dB is just going to be off, as opposed to being minus 45 dB or any of that. And you might be thinking, well, I can't hear that. You just cannot hear that. And you're right, you can't hear that. But with all the gain on, you totally can. So noise gating, if you're going to do noise gating, doing it at like the very beginning of your signal is the most effective thing you can do. It does kind of screw with your sustain if you don't do it right, but considering it for this particular channel, I was only ever doing really choppy rhythm stuff, it didn't really matter. So it was a very purpose-built kind of thing. Yeah, so now in post, just an EQ. Now, the point of having this EQ, you might see it does have quite a drastic change in here. This is a large part just mixing stuff, like, because remember there's a bass guitar involved in here, and this is something that you should do for pretty much whatever metal that you're ever going to make. Is that you need to make room in the low end for the bass guitar, because a guitar can make bass frequencies, and especially if we're talking about a 7-string guitar playing in G sharp, we're making a lot of bass frequencies. That's with the bass guitar. And then I have this limiter. What's this limiter doing? It's sidechaining. Okay, so this is actually being sidechained. I'll talk about that when we get to the mixing and mastering part. Now, let's look at the bass guitar. This is, as I told you in the previous video, a contact patch for the J bass. It has both pickups engaged, and it's not the slap. It's the normal business. Now, the lowest note you see here is actually B, and we're playing at G sharp. And this actually is because what I did is I actually pitched this whole thing down. 2 semitones? 1, 2, 3 semitones. I pitched it down 3 semitones, so that B is now G. So all the notes I'm playing are at B, but that's just the tuning of the song now. So, like, of this particular instrument. So transposition had to happen to make the notes make sense, but that's why when you see it playing B, it's actually playing a G sharp. Now, clean wise, this is what this sounds like. That distortion we're hearing is the compression on the master. Good times. Now, my favorite method of bass processing for metal is that I have a clean version, which is going up here. This is just a regular bass patch. Like there's a couple of like bass presets in Guitar Rig that are totally fine. I chose the Scoop Bass preset, Guitar Rig 5, and this is what it looks like. It's not super complicated, and that's because for all that this is doing, most of the tone that I'm going to create. This is the clean guitar here, clean bass here. What I'm after is that kind of piano-y sounding harmonic sort of presence. And so the way I'm going to do that is I'm actually going to distort this. I'm going to send the same channel past this compression that I created, which is pumping it up a little bit, and I'm going to run it through basically the same kind of distortion. Here's a version of the wave shaper that I have going on, and then here's the preset with one of the original cabinets. It's a bit different than the guitar, but it really generally, as long as it's just doing distortion, it's usually okay. If you wanted to get extra specific, you can run it through the exact same process that the guitar is running through. But a lot of the stuff about the guitar tone that I made was very guitar specific, like the gating, the screaming, the EQ, and that kind of thing. Now, I actually made this before I sort of matured the process, because remember I said about controlling the distortion to be pre and post EQ. I'm only doing post EQ right now. and I'm limiting it to the sort of a harmonic range that I want, and it's doing a good job of kind of creating the tone that I want. However, it would have been a lot better if I put a distortion pre the EQ pre distortion, and then shape that to only distort the frequencies that I wanted, because then it would be much smoother, cleaner, and it wouldn't have been a big deal. Like, I can just demonstrate right now how that would have been better, even with just a basic high pass. Basic high pass. And that sounds like ass, but when it's combined with the rest of it. It's all about the combination. So I didn't do that, but that's okay, because it did kind of still do the job. And such. Now, there was one other element in the stack, and that's this guy. Now, integrating synthetic elements into a metal song is a bit difficult, because the way that sound design wise the metal stuff behaves is very, very different from the sort of the sensibilities that we expect to come out of an electronic song. Electronic stuff is perfect. It's way sharper, cleaner, and can be way louder than a very full spectrum, very washy, smooth, comparatively smooth sounding guitar tone, bass tone, that whole business. So this means that I needed to design a synth sound that still kind of had the qualities of the guitar stuff. And I could have just ran it through the guitar distortion, but I wanted synth quality, because if I did do that, it would just have sounded like another guitarish kind of thing. Which, I mean, it's not bad, but it's not what I wanted. So this is really just like a Reese kind of deal. It's 2 voices in Harmor. I'm doing a little bit of harmonic use and weirdness. I use the wave line type to just change it, just because, I suppose. I mess around with the harmonic phase, I guess. Yeah, a little bit. So the higher frequencies are a bit noisy and different. And I have harmonic randomness on, so each note is a little bit different from the last. So it's almost sort of behaves like a stringed instrument, almost. And then it's distorted. And then it's EQ'd. And then it's reverb. And then this is, I guess, the side chaining still. Yeah, and then, yep. And then a post where I took off some of the higher frequencies. Because a big part of, like, remember the sound design I was talking about is that a lot of the metal stuff doesn't really have a huge amount of high frequencies except for, like, drums, like the cymbals and the drums, and maybe a guy's voice. But for the most part, it's pretty tightly rolled off on the high end. Now, as I mentioned in the previous video about the arrangement and the elements, is that I made a mistake with this sound, and that ended up being good. The mistake was that I was intending this to be the bass. I was intending this to be the frequency that followed the bass. However, it's actually an octave higher than the bass actually is, and that's because it just didn't sound good being at, like, bass range. That's just ridiculous. And so, like, I just went with what sounded comfortable. And even because the bass guitar is at the bass range. So even though the sub in the song is actually in this sound, and it's an octave higher than the actual bass range of the song, it actually still works. Which wasn't my intention whatsoever, but it did work out. And it was pretty cool. So there's that. It's really not a lot going on, not really a huge amount in this sound. But those are the 3 things that basically create the tone of the entire song. And there is a point where I modulate the this guy. And that's just I've got a band just moving around. And I have another automation clip down here, and I have no idea what it's doing. They're the same band, which is weird. Anyway, again, I was attempting to try and impart electronic stuff. And what's more electronic than some wubs? So I wubbed it up a bit, but only at, like, select moments, which is sort of twice, and then near the end here. There is one more sound in this song, however, and that's this kind of creepy lead thing happening. Now, I could have done this with a guitar, and it does kind of sound like it is happening with a guitar, and that's may or may not be because I'm distorting it, but it's like this sort of creepy atonal fighting lead. And what I mean by fighting lead is that there's actually two of them happening. There's this guy and there's this guy. Like I mentioned in the arrangement element parts, what these colors represent is that they're actually different voices, entirely different MIDI channels, which means that these slide notes that are sliding around the pitch of this guy do not affect this guy. So this is staying here, and then this is moving around. So these two pitches are kind of against each other, and it sounds pretty neat. So we have a little bit of prism engaged. I don't think I changed the size. I didn't change anything in here at all. So that means that there's just unison. Unison's on. The phaser's on harmonic mode. And it's actually just, I think this is the default settings, except for the fact it's on harmonic mode. It's really high pitched. The phase randomness is on, so that means there's a little bit of uncertainty there. But, and then it's distorted, clearly. But not here. It's distorted in the effects with the wave shaper, and this reverb, and delay. And that's what makes this sound. But really what makes the sound is the notes that I'm choosing to play and the fact that there's two of them in two different MIDI channels. For the most part, that's kind of what happens. It's usually the same pattern. I think this is it getting louder. Because you can slide parameters other than pitch with slide notes. I bet you didn't know that. I didn't for a long time. So that's all the sounds, I think. What are you? Oh, it's that sound again, just really low. So the last big thing to talk about in this song is Superior Drummer. And I thought about talking about that for this song because it's very sort of designy in how I was handling it, but it is actually just a big part of mixing. So I am going to talk about that in the next video when I cover the mixing and mastering of G sharp. Yes, this is everything. It's really not a lot happening in this song. Although, like, as much as there's not a lot happening, they are individually quite complex things. And it's mostly just because they're not standard EDM fare. They're metal. It's metal stuff. So that's what's up. I really want to know why I have two automation clips happening on the same. Oh, it's bandwidth. All right. That makes a lot of sense. At least it should be. It's level. It's the level and it's at the frequency. All right, cool. Because it's not actually like I wanted kind of like the band passy result, but I didn't want to use a literal band pass because it would destroy my whole thing here. So I am just moving a band around, and it goes up and then it goes down, but it also moves side to side. So it's basically X and Y positioning, and that's why there's two of these. Okay, I understand now. I know what I did in my own song. If you have any questions about this, let me know. And as usual, have a nice day.